Good morning, everyone. I want to welcome you in today. We are going to be talking about autism spectrum disorders for general education teachers and how you can learn a little bit about autism and how to respond to students' needs in your classroom. And I certainly don't expect any of you to already be experts in autism, and I don't expect you to walk away today being experts. But what we do want to happen is for you to walk away with a little more general knowledge of the disorder and how you can help students in your classroom. And we feel that this is an important topic because students with autism spectrum disorder are not all the same. If you've met one student with autism spectrum disorder, you just met one student because there are so many presentations of the disorder, and these students have certainly different needs. But the likelihood that you will encounter a student with an ASD is increasing every year. So we do want you to be able to understand the characteristics of this disorder and the key concepts that you should know when working with those students. So several of the goals we are going to touch on today are: what are the prevalence rates of autism? What is autism spectrum disorder? How is an autism spectrum disorder diagnosed? What might it look like in your classroom? And how you can help students in your class with an autism spectrum disorder. So hopefully when you walk out of here today, we will have hit on all 5 of those topics, and you will feel comfortable that you have learned some key information there. We are first going to start with prevalence rates. And the current statistics from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention are that approximately 1 in every 68 children born in the United States have been identified as having an autism spectrum disorder. And as you will see later on, that number is continually rising. ASDs are reported to occur in all racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic groups, so it doesn't generally just target one population. But ASDs are more common in boys than in girls. Boys are 5 times more likely to be diagnosed with an autism disorder than are girls. On average, about 1 in 54 boys will be diagnosed with an autism spectrum disorder, and 1 in 252 girls will be diagnosed with an autism spectrum disorder. So you can see there that boys are more likely than girls to be diagnosed. And as I said before, the rate of autism diagnosis is growing. You can see here from our chart that the rate has gone from 1 in 50 in the year 2000 to the current 1 in 68 children in the year 2010. So in 10 years, you can just see the increase there. And something we're not going to get into today, but I will just go ahead and throw it out for you, is there's some debate over what is causing that increase. Some people think that we might just be doing a lot better job of catching the disorder and diagnosing students with it. Some people think that there could be something in the environment that is causing the higher rates of autism. And some people, think that it could be vaccines or something children are eating. We just really don't know at this point. It's not a very well understood disorder in regards to what causes it. But just know that the rates are rising, so the likelihood that if you haven't already, that you will have a student with autism in your class is a real likelihood these days. Now, what is an autism spectrum disorder? And if you hadn't caught on already, us that talk about autism all the time will use the term ASD. It's a lot shorter than having to say autism spectrum disorder all the time. So when you hear ASD in this presentation, we are talking about autism spectrum disorders. And it is a term used to describe a broad group of complex brain disorders. And the disorder is characterized in varying degrees by impairments in social interaction, verbal and nonverbal communication, and repetitive behaviors. Now, a student with autism may have impairments in all 3 areas. They may have impairments in just 2 areas, and then they will have impairments in varying degrees. Some may have slight impairments, while others have more severe impairments in the different areas. Now, ASDs can also be associated with intellectual disability, difficulties in motor coordination and attention, and physical health issues such as sleep and gastrointestinal disturbances. Some individuals with ASD may excel in visual skills, music, math, and art. Now, how is autism diagnosed? It can be difficult. Let me just go ahead and say that. Because unlike other things like diabetes, cancer, other things that someone might be diagnosed with, there are no medical tests that can detect autism spectrum disorder. There's not a blood test or a brain scan as of yet that can tell us conclusively whether a student or child has autism. Really, it's left up to trained physicians or therapists that can look at a child's behavior and development and make a diagnosis. They will do that by looking at delays in developmental milestones, which we'll talk about shortly, and unusual behavior, things that just seem off, that are not what a typically developing student or child would be doing. An ASD can be detected at 18 months or younger by an experienced professional, and that's where these developmental milestone checks come in to be very important, because if we do catch it fast enough, the interventions can begin earlier. But the average age of a diagnosis right now is between the ages of 2 and 6. But there are some cases where individuals do not receive a final diagnosis until they are much older. So for those of you teaching preschool and kindergarten, you may have a student in your class with autism and they may not be diagnosed yet. So just keep that in mind. And as I said, developmental milestones are very important. These are what physicians are going to be look at when they do the well checks for children. They will be looking to see that they're falling within these typical ranges of times when we expect children to be displaying certain milestones. So I won't read them all to you, but I'll give you a couple minutes just to look through. On here you see there's ranges from 0 to 3 months, 4 to 6 months, 7 to 12 months, and it will tell you a little bit about some of the things that they are looking at that might be red flags. And red flags mean it's something that we expect the child to be able to do now, and they are not currently able to do that or do not engage in that behavior. And if we see these things from 0 to 12 months, they would certainly be red flags that there may be something going on with that student developmentally. Same goes for red flags from 12 to 36 months. It gives us things to look for. I'll give you guys a chance to look those over. I'm not going to read them all to you, but again, if these are things that we expect students to be able to do by this age, and if they can't, then we might think that there could be something going on. Okay. The American Academy of Pediatrics recommends that all children from birth to age 3 be screened for developmental milestones during routine well visits. And these routine well visits do include the screening for autism spectrum disorders. So if students are not meeting those developmental milestones, meaning that list we just looked at, any of those red flags pop up, or a combination of those red flags pop up, things that the student is not able to do, is when a doctor would say, hey, there may be something else going on here, let's do a check for something else. And they would do an additional screening for autism. When the routine screening or a parent raises concerns about a child's development, the doctor can conduct the more in-depth evaluation for ASD or refer the child to a specialist in development and early intervention. Now, a typical diagnostic evaluation involves a multidisciplinary team of doctors, and that can include the primary care doctor, the pediatrician, a psychologist, a speech-language pathologist, an occupational therapist, We really want a whole team of people to get together and really look at what's going on with this student, because again, each of those people will bring in their own specialty and things that they're looking for that the child should be able to do. So our speech language pathologist is going to be looking at what language skills do I expect a child to have by this age. Your occupational therapist is going to be looking at what fine motor skills do I think this student should have by now. The psychologist is going to be looking for any abnormal behavior. So this team, ideally it should be a team. It's not always, but ideally it should be a team of people that come together and discuss different things. Where should this child be? Where are they? Are there gaps? Do we see signs of autism here? And the American Psychiatric Association's Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, which you will hear called the DSM for short, provides standardized criteria for diagnosing autism. Now, we're going to talk about two different tools today, the DSM-4 and the DSM-5. The reason we're going to discuss both of them briefly is the manual that has been used for several years now is the DSM-4. In May of 2013, a new manual was brought out, the DSM-5, and it did make some changes to the way autism is diagnosed. So I just want you to be aware of both of them and the most recent changes. But the first one we're going to talk about is the DSM-4, and it is the most widely used standardized criteria for diagnosing an autism spectrum disorder. It breaks the disorder down into 5 distinct disorders that all fall under the umbrella of autism spectrum disorder. And we'll take a look at that in a minute. The DSM-4 looks at qualitative impairment in social interaction, qualitative impairment in communication, and a restricted, repetitive, and stereotyped pattern of behavior, interest, and activities. So here's that umbrella I was discussing. We have our broad term autism spectrum disorder. That's the entire umbrella. And then we have the 5 disorders that fall under autism spectrum disorder. We have autistic disorder, Asperger's disorder, childhood disintegrative disorder, Rett's disorder, and pervasive developmental disorder. That one over there on the end means we know that there's something developmentally going on with this child, but we just can't pin down one of those other 4 things. They might necessarily meet some of the criteria for all of them, or not enough of them. We know there's a developmental thing going on, we're just not quite sure what it is, so we will say it's PDD, not otherwise specified. So that is how the DSM-4 classifies autism spectrum disorders. So if you hear someone has an ASD, according to the DSM-4, it could be one of those 5 disorders. Most commonly, what you will hear is autistic disorder and Asperger's disorder. And when we talk about Asperger's disorder, it is basically a higher functioning form of autism. But we will talk about that more when we get to the DSM-5. And like I said, it was introduced in May of 2013. And it did come along with some changes, some that were quite controversial. Others not so much, but it eliminated Rett disorder from the ASD category and classifies the remaining disorders under one name in varying degrees of functioning. It adds a separate category for social communication disorder, and it looks for persistent deficits in social communication and social interaction across multiple contexts. It looks for restrictive, repetitive patterns of behavior, interest, or activities, and the symptoms must be present in early developmental periods of life. Now, if you think back to that umbrella before, we had autism spectrum disorder, and then we had the 5 different classifications under. Those 5 different classifications are no more with the DSM-5. You can think of it as a scale from like 1 to 10. So we have our spectrum right here, a rainbow spectrum. You think about on the end here in red being a 1. That is going to be your severe autism, your very low functioning students that may not even be able to speak, not be able to care for themselves, that need some